Good morning, everybody. It is a pleasure to see everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time to come and join us this morning for this really important discussion. It's really important moment where we're approaching Kristallnacht, the anniversary of Kristallnacht, as we approach November 9th. And just as we are 2 days away, we're going to take a little bit of time together to think about this crucial moment and its relationship to us here and now in the 21st century in 2021. I want to first take a moment to thank the Young Israel of Hewlett for co-sponsoring with us and joining together with us, Simcha Hopkowitz. And it's a pleasure always to join as communities. We have so much we share in common. It's wonderful to always be working together for so many important programs. Welcome to the members of the Young Israel of Hewlett. Welcome to those who are here and who are going to be listening afterwards as well. I also want to take a moment to thank Esther and Nachman Goodman, who are sponsoring in memory of Esther's father, Mr. Abraham Tisser Avram Yehuda ben Moshe Yitzhak alav Shalom, of blessed memory. And one of the reasons the Goodmans reached out was because he was an individual who understood and faced anti-Semitism in its rawest form back in Europe. Just a little bit of a background to Mr. Tisser to appreciate as we start this program. He was born in Dukla, which is a small town just inside of Poland, not far from Krakow. And Esther's father, Mr. Tisser, survived many labor and concentration camps. And his brother, Jack, were the only ones who really survived. He lost his parents and 6 siblings. He survived Buchenwald. When his friend was about to collapse, he carried him on his shoulders during the death march during March. Afterwards, he went to Paris, where he met Esther's mother, by chance. They went not by chance, they went to Israel and were married there in 1950. They had 2 children. And which when work was very difficult there, they moved to America where there was still family, and he still had that very deep connection to Israel, always had that connection. He was a person who didn't have much time for learning, but he knew Tanakh by heart, and he would always study with his children Chumash. He was a very kind and a simple person who was sameach b'chel kol. It is worthy that this discussion is going to be in his memory. And he was also the part of the Gabbai, the Bluzheva Shtibel, for over 45 years. So the way it's going to work this morning is just to introduce the topic and then introduce our presenters, is that we are going to be talking on the topic of the newest face of the world's oldest hate, anti-Semitism, which is continuing and continues in its different iterations to haunt us. And we are standing now 3 years, just over 3 years and a couple of weeks from the Squirrel Hill massacre taking place, the worst massacre of Jews here in America, on the shores of America, which has taken place. That's 3 years from now. And earlier this year, even we ourselves experienced in the streets of New York, the streets of LA, Chicago, acts of anti-Semitism during the May War. And we all feel somewhat uneasy. We all feel that there's something which is not quite right, and we're trying to grapple with this. So today we really have 3 experts, people who really have a perspective on this idea, on our struggle that we're trying to articulate from very different angles. We're going to be hearing from Dr. Henry Abramson, from Michael Cohen, and from Linda Scherzer in just a few minutes. The way it's going to work is we're going to have each presenter is going to have a brief moment to present, just a few minutes to present from their angle this specifically as it relates to us today. And thereafter, there's going to be the opportunity for questions. For those who would like to send in questions, please do post the questions in the chat, and I will try to mediate those questions as we get to the end of the presentations as well. I'll do that at the end of the program, so you have an opportunity to do that throughout the program. Our first presenter is going to be Dr. Henry Abramson. Dr. Abramson is very proudly also the resident scholar of our shul of the Young Israel of Lawrence-Cedarhurst, but more globally, I'm originally a native of Northern Ontario. He has a PhD in history from the University of Toronto and holds visiting and postdoctoral positions in Cornell, Harvard, Oxford, and the Hebrew University of Toronto. He's currently the Dean of Touro in Touro College in Brooklyn, New York, and he's the author of several books, among them the historical context of the Eish Kodesh, a book which has been recognized by many scholars and museums as well. Dr. Abramson is one of the few people who is, well, I would say the only person published by both Feldheim and Harvard University Press. And he is currently the presenter of History in the Jav podcast for the Aldaf program of the Orthodox Union. And he is currently compiling the 3-volume history of the Jewish people for Cohen Publishers in Jerusalem. It is with great pride we turn over to Dr. Abramson. I'm going to give you share screen privileges in just a second.
Thank you very much, Rabbi, for those exceptionally kind words. I'm really glad this is going to be recorded because I'll probably go back and listen to them again. Hebrew University, however, unless something dramatic has happened, is actually located still in Jerusalem, not in Toronto, but I appreciate it very much. Let's just see if I've got yes, I have share screen now. Okay, so I hope you can see this image all right.
Yes.
Okay, very good. My task in 15 minutes is to provide a very quick historical overview of the history of anti-Semitism, not the history of the persecution of Jews, which obviously overlaps with the history of anti-Semitism, but rather to give the audience a sense of the history of ideas that underpins the ideology of anti-Semitism. And it's one of the most fascinating things about this toxic phenomenon is the reality that it is an unusually adaptive hatred, meaning like a virus, it's able to find ways to infect hosts of entirely different chronological, geographic, and historical cultural environments. It seems to find a way to communicate itself into the ancient world, into the East Asian world, to modern America, and it seems to be showing no signs of letting up. In fact, where we are right now in the 21st century, in my humble opinion, we may be at the cusp of a new resurgence of anti-Semitism that we haven't seen in my lifetime, to be sure. So my goal is to give a very broad and rapid overview of the history of anti-Semitism as an ideology, and then I'll turn it over to the panelists to have a much more in-depth discussion of what that means for us today. As you can see in the image here, I just took a screenshot from a tweet that was put out by the ADL that describes a hateful incident that occurred just last week at the George Washington University campus, where a Sefer Torah was desecrated with detergent. And this is really one of the oldest forms of anti-Semitism that we see perpetrated even in our own days. But let's go quickly to the historical overview. One sort of general concept that has to be laid out before we enter this is the reality that the history of anti-Semitism does not have to be sensical. It doesn't have to be logical. In other words, we can't tie these ideas of hate to actual events or phenomena in society. They're often entirely divorced. In fact, as the great philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre once put it in a very important book that he wrote right after World War II, Reflections on the Jewish Question, he said, "Si le juif n'existerait pas, l'antisémite l'inventerait," which means if the Jew did not exist, the anti-Semite would invent him. In other words, anti-Semitism is looking for some excuse to express itself. The reasons for this are complex and enter more the realm of psychology than of history. It's very similar in many ways structurally to misogyny, a similar kind of hatred in which people basically displace their dissatisfaction with their current status or the state of life onto a scapegoat. And the Jews are an incredibly prominent historical scapegoat that are constantly reaffirming the beliefs of anti-Semites because they can reach back further and further for historical quanta to explain their point of view. So one more, so for an example of this, we see one of the most notorious anti-Semitic works of the 19th century is the Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion, which purported to describe the cabal of a Jewish conspiracy to dominate the world. And it was a forgery that was composed in the Russian Empire at the end of the 19th century, but it proved incredibly popular with all kinds of audiences, translated many, many times into multiple languages, and even, as you see here, even into Japanese, rather remarkably, given the very, very tiny presence of Jews in Japan overall. One last prefatory remark is the spelling of the word anti-Semitism. And this is significant not only on a pedantic level, but more importantly on the way we approach anti-Semitism. The term itself is an invented term, a coined term that was designed by this man, Wilhelm Marr, who was himself an anti-Semite. And he wished to find a more polite alternative to the ruder terms Judenfeinde or Judenhass, which were kind of like rude terms. You wouldn't use that in proper political discourse. So he coined the term anti-Semitism in this book, The Way to the Victory of Germanness over Jewishness. He wanted to say that essentially there was something called Semitism to which one could be anti. And so by using that term anti-Semitism, he was saying essentially, hey, I'm not anti-Jewish, I'm not racist, I'm not, prejudiced against any group of people. I am against this philosophy that happens to be expressed by this group of people. And of course, since this philosophy is nonsense, it certainly makes no sense to say one is anti-capital S Semitism. So most scholars today prefer the term anti-Semitism as a single word because it refers to the phenomenon of hatred itself rather than displacing it onto some other fictional notion. Now, let us go to the actual history of the ideas itself. There are basically four major periods, four major devolutions of thought when it comes to the antipathy towards Jews. There's a period that's often identified as classical xenophobia, meaning the fear of strangers, which is something that is especially associated with the ancient period. There is Christian anti-Judaism, which is a special expression of the unique relationship between the mother religion of Judaism and the daughter religion of Christianity, a special dynamic that offers a level of antagonism that is especially prominent up until about the 15th century. And then you get to medieval Jew hatred, which just goes off the rails when it becomes pathological. And there are all kinds of things attributed to Jews that have absolutely no basis, even in theoretical reality, such as the notion that Jews would drink the blood of Christian children and things like that. But it becomes extremely potent and a very venomous type of anti-Semitism that increases the level of rancor incredibly. And then we get to the modern period, which I'll explain in the next slide. Looking at classical xenophobia, when we look at it closely, there's a significant number of nasty things said about Jews in much of Greco-Roman literature. But for the most part, speaking in generalities, it's the same kind of antipathy that the Greeks or the Romans had for non-Greek and non-Roman culture in general. And the kind of hostility that's expressed to Jews is often simply a reflection of their lack of understanding of who the Jews were and what they were all about. For example, because they observed one day of rest every 7 days, which was a novel thing in the ancient world, they were considered lazy. How can they take off so much time from work? Because they would only eat kosher food, they were considered very clannish because they wouldn't, go and participate in non-Jewish catered events. Because they practiced circumcision, and you could only be a Jew if you went through this painful conversion process. They were considered misanthropic, and they only, very looked to themselves and hated other people. And all these things were simple misunderstandings of what Judaism is all about. But what we have to say about all of this is that classical xenophobia, as distasteful as it is essentially a kind of normal human hatred. In the very same way that neighboring cultures often misunderstand each other, even in the United States of America, there are lots of cultural tensions between ethnic groups. And that's just, a normal feature of humans bumping up against each other's worldviews. To see one example of it, if you look at the Arch of Titus shown here in Rome, which was a magnificent structure that was erected to commemorate the defeat of the Jews in the first Roman Jewish war in the first century, there is one particular section underneath the center of the arch on one side, which depicts the Jews carrying away the spoils from the temple to their Roman captors. And this is sometimes interpreted as an image related to anti-Semitism, but it's really just your pretty much run-of-the-mill war propaganda. It doesn't make the Jews look good, but it is not in any way a special bias against Jews that you wouldn't see them celebrating against any other people or barbarian tribe that they may have defeated. Here, by the way, is what it would have looked like in the original, because the Romans rather garishly painted their statues, and it was recently reconstructed with chemical analysis. And you can see they're carrying away the menorah, very apropos since we are now in the month of Kislev, coming up to the holiday of Hanukkah. At any rate, that's what we can say basically about classical xenophobia, is that it is a kind of a normal hatred that, you know, Jews were looked at negatively primarily because they were different than the dominant culture. On the other hand, when you come to Christian anti-Judaism, you have a very different kind of theological conflict, primarily because Christianity, which of course emerges in the first century, is an entirely Jewish phenomenon for the first century-odd activity of its existence. All of the early apostles were Jewish, and of course the founder was Jewish. And as they are separating and moving themselves away from the synagogue, and the synagogue is also taking steps to ostracize people with Christian beliefs from the synagogue, there's a level of antipathy built up. But it is almost entirely theological in nature. As you see, for example, expressed in Gothic art, here's a remarkable structure that showed a trope that we've seen hundreds of times throughout medieval art history. The Ecclesia et Synagoga. On the left is a representation of the church. She's got her bodice done up properly. She's wearing a crown. She's holding a staff that is unbroken, whereas she's contrasted with the synagogue that has no crown, is literally in a posture of decline, falling away from the rock. Her staff is broken, indicating she's lost authority. And from her left hand falls the 10 commandments. She can't even hold on to her own faith. And she is, of course, blindfolded to the truth. And this was especially important for educating illiterate peasants about the theological underpinnings of Christianity and how it should be distinguished from the Jews who were still living among them in many of these villages and urban centers. Sometimes these images had a more violent tone, such as in this 15th century stained glass window from Verben, Germany, which shows, among other things, the hand descending from heaven to crown the church on the left, whereas on the right, representing synagoga with the same kind of images as in Strasbourg, there is a sword descending into the top of her head, a much more violent expression of disapproval. So that's much more the first millennium or so of the Common Era, in which there is a theological overlay. It's more of a debate between a priest and a rabbi, rather than, you know, between cultures bumping up against each other. By the time we get to the 13th century, but especially by the 15th century, things go completely pathological, and all kinds of new ideas are invented, such as this bizarre blood libel that Jews somehow need to, you know, capture Christian children and then reenact the crucifixion and then drink their blood in order for various ritual purposes. Absolutely absurd, with no basis in reality whatsoever. This evolves or devolves into images like the Judensau that depicts Jews. And by the way, these are all designated as Jews because they have the small circle on their cloaks, which was a part of the church regulation from 1215 onward, that Jews were supposed to have some kind of distinguishing feature like a badge on their cloaks. And even the devil here is shown wearing a Jewish badge, and they're involved in various disgusting activities with a pig. Again, no real theological content to this, and way beyond anything you see in the period of classical xenophobia, but that's characteristic of the medieval period. I should point out that, especially in this very brief presentation, I am placing things into large chronological blocks, but there's a certain degree of overlap, such as, for example, this 21st century. In fact, last July, a painter in Italy, reproduced in absolutely horrific detail, another example of the blood libel, even in our own times, in this very year. Rather amazing how offensive this image could be, and yet it would be circulated in contemporary times. So that's basically taking us up until the modern period. In the modern period, there is a dramatic change that is largely the result of the thought of Joseph Arthur de Gobineau, Count de Gobineau, who started the notion of racism in a very famous essay on the inequality of human races. He articulated this notion, which borrowed heavily from Darwin in particular, that there are different qualities to divisions in humanity along racial terms. And this idea of race was actually quite new in the 19th century. Prior to that, we did have the sense of color bias, but the notion of a kind of a quasi-scientific distinction between peoples based on race was a huge innovation. And in terms of the various races, Africans were considered to be less intelligent, and the Northern Aryans were considered to be much more punctual and noble and so on. The Jews were viewed as a kind of a parasite race, that their genius was their ability to find healthy societies, to infect them like vermin, and then, degrade them from the inside and ultimately take over and then move on to the next host. As you see in this 20th century Austrian election poster, the Jew is portrayed as a kind of a worm choking to death the Austrian eagle, or here in a also 20th century German novel, Die Sünde wider das Blut, the sin against the blood, and then underneath it says Ein Zeitroman, a novel of the times, which shows the Jew as a carrion-eating vulture that is somehow weighing down the healthy, muscular Aryan man, waiting for him to expire so he can pick on his bones. This is the image you'll note has neither of these images have anything to do with theology, nothing to do with the cultures bumping up against each other and saying that the Jews are somehow different because we misunderstand them. This is a wholly invented ideology that nevertheless was extremely influential and, of course, resulted in one of the bloodiest centuries in history. Another element of the modern period, not necessarily associated with de Gobineau, but building on it, was the notion that these Jews, constituting a separate kind of vermin parasite race, are engaged in a conspiracy, that one of the skills of the Jews is that somehow they're able to join together around the world. So you see many examples, such as in this French example, which is late 19th century, that shows the Jews dominating the world, or in this Mexican publication of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which shows again the capitalist Jew with the traditional waistcoat and things like that, squeezing blood out of the earth. The caption reads, by the way, the invisible world government, right? Another way of saying the Jews, the Jewish program to subjugate the world. So this combination of racism and conspiracy is what especially is associated with the modern anti-Semitic trope. The Nazi strain essentially takes it to an extreme. Children's propaganda, like this book, Their Gift Pills, which is all about recognizing the difference between regular mushrooms and toadstools, which are poisonous, saying that, Jews may look like regular people, but they are actually a separate race and they are quite dangerous and so on. Here's another example from some of these children's propaganda from the Nazi period, showing the distinctions between Jews and non-Jews, and Aryans in particular, and the notion of conspiracy. These are all tropes which were developed in the late 19th century, but the Nazis took to an extreme. Finally, to wrap it up and just think for a minute about how things might be changing in our times, and then I'll be very happy to hand over to the other panelists to explain this to me. We're now in a period where one of the most important ideas, at least in America, is this concept of the Great Replacement, that somehow the Jewish racial conspiracy that was first articulated in the 19th century is going to result in some kind of taking over specifically of white male power in America, that fuels a lot of the anti-Semitism on the right in particular. That's an extremely important phenomenon in America, and it goes right out of the 19th century. We also see some absolutely horrific anti-Semitic propaganda related to Israel, which sometimes comes from the left. Sometimes the criticism of Israel goes way past any of the normal boundaries of what we would expect as political conflict, such as this image, which evokes the blood libel, and this horrific image as well, which, it's just hard to understand this within the realm of normal human conversation. The coronavirus has also exacerbated much of this conflict. And you see in this example, the Palestinian woman who was trapped between the wall that separates pre-1967 Israel with the region called the West Bank, and on the other hand, COVID, and many other examples blaming Jews for COVID and strange things like that. So with that, I've concluded my lightning tour of a very nasty part of Jewish history. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak, and I look very much to hearing what the panelists have to say about our times.
Wow, well, all I can say is that it's very sobering to think of it from this perspective. Thank you for sharing, and it's very painful to have to absorb this. And just a reminder for the folks, if anybody has any questions for any of the panelists, please feel free to post them in the chat, and God willing, with time at the end, we'll have a chance to go through them and to present them. We're going to move straight on now. Now we move from the historical perspective, we move to our next presenter, who's Michael Cohen. Michael is currently serves as the Eastern Director of the Simon Wiesenthal Center, a global human rights organization confronting anti-Semitism, hate and terrorism, training tens of thousands on prejudice, diversity, and tolerance issues, and supporting the state of Israel. Michael is a regular columnist in the Jewish Standard and Jewish Link on issues facing the Jewish community, and serves on the Israeli Consulate Speakers Bureau, the Hadassah Speakers Bureau, and was appointed by the New Jersey Governor Murphy as a member of the New Jersey Israeli Commission. Michael previously served as the New York State Director of Political and Strategic Affairs to Bishop Del Giorna and Giblin, recognized as one of the most influential lobbying firms in New York. Michael also served as a senior staff member to the New York State Senate leadership, senior staff member to the Congressman Towns, former chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, and senior advisor to New York City Council member Eugene. Michael also has served as a campaign strategist for over 100 political campaigns and is currently serving his 4th term on the Englewood, New Jersey City Council. Michael previously served 4 terms as a member of the Brooklyn Community Planning Board, number 14, and was recognized in 2010 as one of the Capital newspaper's 40 under 40 rising stars in New York State government, and again in 2017 as New York Media's 40 under 40 rising stars in the not-for-profit sector. Michael is the graduate of Brooklyn College and holds a master's degree in political science. His most cherished role, however, is the father of, and is the husband to his wife Ilana, and father of their beloved children Eitan, Alex, Jesse, Zeke, Lexi, and Jack. And to say personally as well, had the opportunity of working with Michael on many occasions locally here and beyond. In fact, the anti-Semitism rally that we had in May, the end of May, was organized and orchestrated by Michael together with the community leaders here. It is with a great pleasure that we have the opportunity of hearing from Michael Cohen.
Well, thank you so much, Rabbi Trump, and I just want to thank both you, all of the efforts to put today's program together, and obviously our co-hosts, Young Israel Hewlett and Rabbi Hopkovitz, as said earlier. It's so critical for us all to have these kinds of programs, and no matter how many times we have them, it's so critical to understand that our communities need to understand what's happening. They need to understand what's going on in our communities and what we need to do to push back on anti-Semitism. So there cannot be enough of these kind of programs and reminders. And unfortunately, for all of us on the panel today, we know that there's never a dearth of material and new material, and that's part of the problem, obviously. One of the things that I really wanted to hit home on today, as a lot of the conversations that we've had, Rabbi Trump, is really what is the effect and what is the effect of the things and activist activities that we can take, and what's happening in our communities, and what are some of the effects that we are able to have on showing that there is hope, there is light at the tunnel, and there is a rationale in our communities can do to fight anti-Semitism. As you referenced just a moment ago, the rally that we had in Cedarhurst Park back in May, that was right after Joey Morgan was attacked, a longtime family in Lawrence, and it really hit home. And you saw right away the second he was attacked, we had the next day a forum with folks in the community, with NYPD and with the leadership in Nassau County. And you saw 2 hours before Shabbos, you still had just about every single rabbi and community leader in the 5 towns and area, because that's just the heightened understanding of how this hit close to home. But one of the key things we had after the rally, and if you looked at the statistics of the rally, in 4 days we put together about 4,500 people. It was seen as the largest ever gathering in Cedarhurst Park. So the questions afterwards were, great, we accomplished that, we did that, now what? Or what was the impact of that rally? What's the long-term impact of that rally? And I'll tell you, there are so many impacts of that. We talk about anti-Semitism here and how we all saw it come together in the community, and the 5 towns come together around Joey Borgen in that instance. And folks are talking about what's the effect on COVID and increasing anti-Semitism. But one of the things we need to remember and keep reiterating to our local leadership and regional leadership and national leadership is, look where we were right before COVID. Look where we were in 2019. Just to give you an example, in 2019, just in New York City, in the 5 boroughs where NYPD keeps very good statistics, there were 419 reported hate crimes, felony level hate crimes in New York City in 2019. 242 of them, it's 58%, were against Jews. So when you look at, and then when you look at all religious-based hate crimes, these are not just misdemeanors, these are felony level hate crimes. 63% of all felony level hate crimes that were religiously motivated were against Jews. So when we talk about all these kinds of activities in the city and all these activities in our region, and we look to see who's affected, between all the rhetoric and all the news stories we see, these are the actual numbers. And this was happening prior to COVID. And remember, we had the march on the Brooklyn Bridge. We were already at that point, at a boiling point already. And then when folks say, well, that was a 26% increase over 2018, well, do the math. 242 felony level incidents against Jews in 2019. So subtract 26%. Is that an acceptable number either? So this is where we are. But then you look at the rally, and I was privileged, to be with with Eric Adams when he at the victory party that he had on primary night that night back in September. And I'll tell you, in that crowd, in that environment, where there was no impetus for him to talk about anti-Semitism, there was no reason for it. There was no. He'd already just won the election. The crux of what was happening there. And at his speech, he starts talking about Joey Borgen. He starts saying, we need to fight and make sure that anti-Semitism is a priority, because we need to remember people like the streets of Midtown Manhattan can happen again. Now think about that for a second. Political night, biggest professional night of his career. The thing that he's talking about, almost 5,000 people in Cedarhurst Park talking about what happened that night and how important that has to be to this administration. Think about the impact that we had there. So when we talk about having our voices heard, yes, that matters. And it has an effect. When we look at NYPD, commanding officer, Jessica Corey, we invited her right away to speak at that rally. And she got great cheers because right away she was at the bedside of Joey Borgen at the hospital there. And right away, I was at her office a few weeks later, her commissioner, report back to the administration. 3 detectives to the hate crimes task force were added to make sure that they have enough staff to cover everything. We are now at the largest amount ever at the NYPD hate crimes task force. Now, that's not something that I want to be proud of. I don't want to have that kind of activity. But when you want to know about what our impact is on what's going on in the departments and agencies that we need to, there's a direct correlation between having our voices heard and between the impact and effect right there. You look at also what on panel to panel you've been hearing for the last few months, key effect that we've had is you've heard about the IRA definition. The definition of anti-Semitism that was passed by 34, now it's the 34 countries of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. So what does that do? It's a non-binding, many times have we heard, whether it's on college campuses, whether it's in law enforcement, whether it's in communities, that, well, we didn't realize that was anti-Semitism. We didn't understand that that's what crossed the benchmark. We didn't know. Well, we all know something. What do you mean you didn't know? There's an actual definition which the U.S. Board of Education has approved, which the State Department, 34 countries has approved. It's there. There's a defined mechanism that you express into anti-Semitism. Because we don't want to hear that you think you're in some sort of hole, because not. And these are important, but our job here, these are just a few examples. Our job is hardly done. When you look at what the last year and a half or so, just in local, 5 towns, Long Island communities, been just last week, or sorry, a week and a half ago now. So you had a candidate running for Suffolk County Legislature. His name was Manuel Esteban Sr. So all of a sudden, all of us were talking about how at the end of a panel against a Jewish candidate, he right away starts talking about, quoting passages about the historical greed and money changers and all these kinds of things. He said everything other than actually saying the word Jew. And everybody's mouth on that panel, you saw the mouth gaping open. I can't believe this man in a public Zoom-related publicized forum running for office thinks it's okay to say this. And every Jewish organization, on Long Island right away went after him together, united together, spoke out together. Newsday did an article about that. He was very quick to apologize and realize what's going on. But still, the fact that he thought that was okay to say at a public forum just 2 weeks ago, it just shows you where people's heads are at. You look at just a few weeks earlier than that, right before the holidays this year, what happened in Chabad at the beaches, when all of a sudden you had Torahs desecrated, you had a shul desecrated. But once again, what did our activism do? You had immediate law enforcement in there. You actually had, it was almost comical how you had every single elected official holding separate press conferences on the boardwalk, all on the same day, wanting to outdo each other to show how they were searching the beaches for the Torahs. Now, whether or not that's actually practically meaningful or not, it's symbolically meaningful. And the police then had to comb every single corner of every single inch of the sand of everywhere else to try to get back to where we want to be. What does that mean? It means that our activism is making people recognize that they have to do something. We're not going to be quiet, and we're going to be in their face on these kind of issues. Because just a few months earlier, we all stood in front of the Oceanside Sanitation Department, where you had Ryan Helmsley, one of the sanitation commissioners, we saw posted and had all these screenshots of anti-Semitic, racist, anti-Asian, you name it, diatribes on his Facebook page. But the answer that he had to it in his initial denials and then changing his denials and whatever it was part of what he said was key for us to listen to, saying that when he got elected only a year and a half or something like that prior, he hadn't been elected for a long period of time, but that the officials who wanted to put him up to run for that position knew about it and basically threw it under the carpet and said, don't worry, we'll figure it out, keep on going. When you have folks who are saying that's okay, continue, instead of saying, oh my God, we're pulling him out, it doesn't matter our political persuasion, it doesn't matter anything else, this cannot continue, that shows people are still trying to get away with things of this nature and don't recognize its significance. But when you look at some of the things that activism has accomplished in these regards, so you look at just a few months ago in New Jersey, I know Linda is very familiar with these issues. What happened in Jackson just a few months ago, where Gubar Grewal, who unfortunately is no longer the Attorney General, but you got to realize the Attorney General in New Jersey, unlike in New York, is an appointed figure by the governor, so there are larger political implications in that regard. So he filed a lawsuit against the town of Jackson, where they had been using zoning laws to try to make sure for years that zoning could affect making sure you couldn't have Jewish institutions. You had to have X amount of acreage or X amount of things that were just not realistic in any municipality. But suddenly, the New Jersey State Attorney General, which had to consult with the governor because that's just the way that these things work in New Jersey politically, meaning just the appointment process, is right away suing the town of Jackson on anti-Semitism. But also think about why he did that. One of the reasons he did that. Not just because it was wrong, but because he understood that 3 years earlier, we worked with him in Mahwah and in Rockland County on the border there, where we ended up having the Attorney General suing the city of Mahwah in one of the largest lawsuits, if not the largest lawsuit, for anti-Semitism specifically against the town of Mahwah for trying to preclude Jews from using. The scary part of those meetings was anybody knows who's gone to a local city council meeting, you're lucky to get 15, 20 people at a local city council meeting. We had over 500-600 people at local city council meetings, at those meetings saying constantly that they wanted to hear about the anti-Semitic resolutions. They wanted to see those things passed. They were afraid of what the Jewish community was, or even though the Jewish community was not actually coming to Mahwah, there was a misunderstanding about what was going on. But I'll tell you our advocacy there was successful because one of the things we did to highlight it was we had a long-term with an individual named Anthony Kira, who's now got reelected to the County Sheriff's Office, but at that point was the NAACP chair for Bergen County. And we had been having conversations for years about these situations, about the historic relationship between the Black and Jewish community. When Mahwah started to explode, I didn't call him. He called me and said, we've been waiting for an opportunity to show how we can work together. Here it is. What can I? He gets up, comes all the way to Mahwah, which is a good half an hour from him, brings 2 or 3 of his executive board chairs of NAACP, comes to Mahwah community meeting, and gets up in front of the cameras and ends up speaking on behalf of Jews and anti-Semitism as the head of the NAACP, and saying this is based on a 10-year relationship building a relationship with him, led to activating the Attorney General, which is activating the Attorney General on accident. So all these pieces all fit together. Long-term activism, it's not a one-shot. It's not there's one issue here and all of a sudden it's supposed to be cured. You need to have those constant involvement, that constant activity. It's not about one rally. It's about we can do this again. We've shown that we can bring 5,000 people. So we can do next time. It's constant activism that we have to do. You think in New York, one of my closest friends, his name is Walter Mosley. He was an assemblyman in New York for 4 terms, for 8 years. And when Phil Goldfeder, who we all know as was introducing the anti-BDS in New York State Assembly, Walter came up to him as an African-American leader and saying to him, listen, let me take that bill from you and be the primary introducer, because from you, it's going to be expected. From me, it's not. And we need to make sure it gets that kind of highlight. But that's also, it's based on long-term relationships. Walter ended up flying to Canada on his own dime, saying they heard that the Canadian Parliament was thinking about an anti-BDS resolution, and he called the legislators there and minority legislators there so I can tell them what we're doing in New York about BDS and why it's important to fight it. I mean, think about that, what that activist done. Think about how a leader in the African-American community spends his own money to fly to Canada. We right now, in the Rockaways, we have a brand new city council person. She's been there for 6, 8, 10 months. Selvina Brooks Powers. She right away, when the rally started, insisted that she come and speak against anti-Semitism in Lawrence that night, in Cedarhurst that night. But this is somebody who I knew as working with me in the Senate 10, 15 years ago, who took the time to build those relationships and understand a special way. Going to come and show something. We need to make sure that we have constant activism. But we look at some of these programs, we look at what's going on, when we look at the pandemic, what is the biggest problem with the pandemic now? The biggest problem is we've evolved into more of a digital anti-Semitic world. We've evolved into digital hate. We've evolved into being allowed to have lone wolves now think that they can highlight and build their manifestos and do what they want to do with getting the message out in a way that they couldn't do prior. So in the past, when nobody would know why they wanted to do what they wanted to do, they kind of felt, well, why am I doing this? But now you have people recruiting online. And you have people being able to sit in their little basement, not being recognized, and proliferate anti-Semitism in ways we haven't seen before. We saw in Ocean County, a group called Rise Up Ocean County grew to, initially it was about 5,000, 6,000 people got on. And I was speaking at that point to Rabbi Aaron Cutler, and we were saying, well, what should we do about this? Should we act as if it doesn't exist, or should we attack it full on? I said, you already have 5,000 people signed on in the region. It's beyond the ability to ignore. They started putting together videos that actually made fun of the Holocaust. They actually made parodies of Niemöller's quote, saying, well, now the Jews came and we said nothing. And now they came to our council and we said nothing, and who's left? I mean, these are parodies that they're making about the Holocaust and to their membership. And their membership didn't get embarrassed. It grew to 20,000 people almost. So we ended up fighting. We fought back. We got Ocean County freeholders, now they're called the legislature, to pass a resolution condemning Rise Up Ocean County. So that we got an interfaith with the head of the NAACP there, the head of the Catholic Church there, the head of the head imams there, to all come together with us together to say basically, we will not stand for this. This is not okay. And by coalescing together, we got Ocean County organizations saying they're there to protect the residents of Ocean County, to be condemned by their elected county legislature. So what does that mean? It means that when you see, yes, you have your 5 or 10% of people who are really rabid anti-Semites, but everybody else looking for something to grasp onto, as Dr. Abramson said earlier, when people are looking for an excuse, they're looking for somebody to blame. Well, here it wasn't a silver platter, but now your county legislature condemns that error. Well, now the average person thinks twice. Well, now I'm a taboo maybe. Now it's not as right as I thought it was. And we ended up working with Facebook, with Twitter, with Instagram. We have at the Wiesenthal Center regular meetings with them and show them what they're doing. And they knocked them off Facebook. So they tried coming on again, and we knocked them off again. So yes, they're still coming on, but those 20,000 people are not following them from step to step. You've gone from 20,000 people to a few hundred. You've changed the dynamic of Ocean County. And I delivered last week the Wiesenthal Center's Courage to Remember exhibit, a 40-panel exhibit on the Holocaust to show from 1933 to 1945, showing how hate builds, that they're going to now have in their libraries, in their school system. You're changing the culture down there because of the activism that happens. It works. To everybody who says, well, what does my one voice say? What does my one piece of activism do? This is what it does. We look at right now, it's turned into where we've been able to build a combat digital hate program. The 5 boroughs, the New York City was funded for 2 years now, where we're actually going to middle school and high schools, and we've done it also in Hafter and in Halm and other schools, where we're actually showing people at the middle school level, at the high school level, how to identify and recognize anti-Semitism, racism, bigotry, and hate, and what can you do about it? We created an app that says, here's how you can actually do something about it, not just complain about it. So there are these mechanisms. We built the internship program to build next generation leadership, to get them involved and teach them the mechanisms of not just shouting at a rally, but how to do it with the press? How do you do the elected officials? How do you build a sophisticated methodology on fighting anti-Semitism in a meaningful and helpful way? So to me, it's simple. Are we as active as we need to be? Absolutely not. I just saw somebody on the chat post that we only had 4,500 people there. We should have had more. You're right. You're 100% right. But we need to build from somewhere. And if that was the largest we've ever had, great. Let's do better next time. But this activism works. Pushing back works. I spend time on the other side of the activism world, on the government side, for 15, 18 years in the leadership, in Congress, working for the Congressional Black Caucus, working for the Senate. And I'm telling you, if you hear the conversations that are happening around the water coolers there, they are about a lot of what is the level of activism that we are showing. When we don't show up at the Israeli Day parade, that gets noticed. When we don't show up at rallies, that gets noticed. When you had a rally that Alicia Wiesel put together in DC a few months ago, and less than 2,000 people show up, that gets noticed. But also for the counter, when you have people show that they respond to people like that, that they come out and they fight back in the right, respectful, and proper way, whether it's on our communities, it works and it builds us the coalitions to have an impact. So with that, I just wanted to, once again, thank everybody here for being here today, and to just recognize that your activism matters. It a tangible, significant to be active and increase your activity. Get your neighbors, your schools, your institutions, your Jewish community centers, your whatever institutions you're involved with, to make sure that they are active on every one of these issues on a consistent basis and build the relationships we need to do that. So I just one more thing to say, we built, which Rabbi Trump is a part of. We built a community coalition in the 5 towns and vicinity, about a year ago, where we started having conversations with different parts of the community and realizing here are a lot of the relationships that we need to have and have in depth. So it's not just, oh, who's a leader on that side of the aisle when we need something. But for instance, Rabbi Trump built a close relationship with a good friend of mine, Reverend Al Cockfield. And now it's a kind of thing where the two of them can call each other and say, what's going on here? Let's have a real conversation. It's not, wait, who's the leadership of that organization? Who's the leadership in the Jewish community? So, Rabbi Trump, I commend you for that. I commend all of all the people on this panel for work they have all done that I've seen over the years. And we need to continue doing this together. So, and thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Michael. Really, this is an eye-opener in so many ways. And if people aren't aware of some of the items that Michael was addressing, it is really important to become aware. So if one does not know what Rise Up Ocean County is, take a look at it, see what they're printing, and see how the propaganda resembles very eerily disturbing images, and how they're reposting a lot of anti-Jewish tropes, and it turns into anti-Israel tropes as well. This is very concerning, but as well at the same time also the hopefulness. And what Michael was also saying in terms of relationships, the importance of relationships. Every person that we have, when we care about the issues that matter to our neighbors, they care about the issues that matter to us as well. It's important to be aware of this. We have the distinct privilege of hearing our final and third presenter, and that is from Linda Scherzer, who is not unknown to our community, because Linda has actually worked with a number of our youth in our community and our area. Let's just a bit of background. Linda is the former Middle East correspondent for CNN and Israel television, with extensive experience covering the Arab-Israeli conflict. During her years with CNN, Linda covered the first Palestinian uprising or intifada, the Gulf War and Mid-East peace process. She was based in Jerusalem, but had covered events related to the region at CNN's Washington bureau in the State Department. She's probably best remembered for an interview with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu through gas mask during an Israeli Scud missile attack. Linda was the only North American ever to work as an on-air correspondent for Mabat, Israel Television's Hebrew news program, where she covered Arab and Palestinian affairs. She traveled to Damascus twice to report on Syrian attitudes towards the peace process, and produced a 1-hour documentary, Through the Eyes of Our Enemies, Is the Middle East Ready for Peace?, which explores opinion in Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, and Egypt towards Israel. She's the recipient of 5 Associated Press Broadcasting Awards, along with her colleagues at CNN, received a Cable ACE Award for distinguished coverage of the Gulf War. Since 2002, Linda has been the director of Right On for Israel New York program, teaching top high school students how to lead the pro-Israel community when they get to college. Linda is also the director of the Community Relations Committee, the Government Affairs and Israel Advocacy Division of the Jewish Federation of Greater Metro West. She received a Master's of Journalism degree from Northwestern University's Medill School of Journalism, and her undergraduate degree from Brandeis University. She lives in New Jersey with her husband and 3 children. And I want to thank, first of all, Phil Rosen for making the connection and opportunity of Linda welcoming you back to our community, because you have so profoundly influenced so many of our youth and the next generation in sharing your passion for Israel and protecting our rights as Jews. Thank you very much for being here with us.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Trump, and thank you for inviting me to join this very esteemed panel this morning. I have to tell you that every time that I hear my CNN credentials bounce off the ears of a Jewish audience, particularly one as Israel connected as this audience, I'm never quite sure if those CNN credentials are an asset or a liability. But I will say that I have, in the eyes of many members of the Jewish community, made up for those years by virtue of the 20 years that I've been working for the Right On for Israel program. And as you mentioned, while I'm zooming in today from Bergen County, New Jersey, as is Michael, I have a long-standing connection to the 5 towns to your community. I would say the overwhelming majority of students in the Right On program have come from your community. They are incredible students, wonderful families, have been leaders in the pro-Israel community over the past 20 years, and I'm deeply proud to be associated with all of them, and thank Phil very much for connecting us. His son Joseph also, of course, was in the program. So, you know, it's a sad topic, actually a depressing topic to be talking about early on a Sunday morning. Thankfully, we all got an extra hour of sleep this morning, so I come a little bit more prepared and caffeinated as I present to you. I do want to say that, you know, I had hoped and planned to actually have a PowerPoint presentation to share with you, but it grieves me to tell you that I have been so preoccupied and busy with this whack-a-mole kind of dealing with situations of anti-Semitism in the community where I work in my Jewish Federation role, which covers 5 counties in the state of New Jersey. It is by far the largest Jewish federation, representing 150,000 Jews, that I had no time. And what does that look like? It's everything from dealing from a candidate for public office in Morris County, New Jersey, who spoke at a recent Board of Education meeting comparing mask mandates designed to protect public health with Nazi mandates during the Second World War, during the Holocaust, even quoting Elie Wiesel, to middle schoolers in the town of Montclair, New Jersey, who are, you know, declaring "I love Nazis." I mean, kids who this kind of this you know, appalling culture has actually trickled down from the colleges to the high schools and now the middle schools, and you can't ignore it. I mean, this man from Chatham may be a nobody. I mean, I don't know if he's even been elected. They're still counting the votes, but it can't be ignored. And so the numbers of hours that I've invested in speaking to him, in dealing with the outrage in the community has just, you know, I would say the amount of time has gone from about 5% of my time as a Jewish professional to at least 25%. And we are not the ADL. You know, this is the Jewish Federation. But again, as the convener of a Jewish community, along with Michael Cohen and other representatives of Jewish organizations, we have to be dealing with this. So that's the defense mode of what I do. In the proactive mode, you know, we're lobbying for nonprofit security grant funding to be able to secure our synagogues, our Jewish institutions. We're getting state funding, federal funding, to make sure that targets are hardened, that the federal and state governments are investing in the security of our Jewish institutions in those buildings. So those are the kinds of things that I do in one role as a Jewish Federation professional, and a little bit later, time permitting, I'm going to tell you what my approach is. It doesn't differ that much from Michael's, but before I get to that, I want to talk about the central piece of my presentation, which is dealing with what's happening on the college campuses, because I would say, and as Dr. Abramson referred to it, you know, one of the modern day expressions of anti-Semitism, certainly from the hard left and not so far left, but the left wing of American politics, is the hatred and delegitimization of Israel. And the front lines of those intellectual debates have been on the college campuses in this country. Now, not all of them. I'm not suggesting that on every college campus there is a burning fire. And many of our kids are going off to campus and doing exactly what they're supposed to be doing and experiencing it the way that we experienced it. They're tending to their academics. They're preparing for their professional lives. They're, you know, engaging in a social life. These are arguably the 4 best years of their lives as they, you know, prepare to launch themselves as adults. But, you know, on far too many campuses in this country, our students not only are dealing with these intellectual debates, but to my great chagrin, they are participating in them. They are, they are actively promoting the Palestinian or left-wing idea that Israel was founded as a Jewish state on land that was ethnically cleansed of its indigenous population. And here it's not middle schoolers, saying, I love Nazis. It is those nuanced debates that are happening both in the classroom and on the college green that is creating conflict for our kids, for our Jewish kids. I'm not talking necessarily about the 5 towns. These students, your students, are grounded in a deep love and connection to Israel, but they represent the minority of the American Jewish community. And all the kids, including my own, who, by the way, went to conservative Jewish day school, don't have the proper grounding and understanding of our history. And I'm not even referring to ancient history. I'm referring to the last 25 years, 30 years, when Israel was actively engaged in a peace process that led to, we know, not the first intifada, the second intifada, and a process that was completely blown apart. And my kids, as well as those entering college in the year 2021, were too little. They were babies when buses were exploding in the heart of Israeli cities. They don't know the kind of trauma that we went through. They don't have that in their kishkas. Instead, they're being exposed to these kinds of progressive ideas on campus that creates conflict in their hearts. Like, and frankly, in my day with CNN, the images drive the story. Those compelling pictures of, an Israeli army that is trained to fight Syrians, one of the most dominant armies in the entire world, that is running after 6-year-olds and 16-year-olds in refugee camps. Those images in my day that I helped to communicate, frankly, those were my stories. Today, they're on social media. They're in the hands of kids on this device 24 hours a day. And our kids don't know what to do with those images. They don't know how to make the arguments. They are totally unprepared, underconfident. And some of them are checking out. So, what does that look like on college campus? Today, I would say what I'm hearing, the dominant message that I'm hearing from my students is that Jewish kids, and I'm not talking necessarily about the day school students, I'm talking about students who go again to public, private, non-secular schools, who have social justice issues that are wired into their DNA. Kids who want to be fighting against climate change, kids who want to be standing up for social justice, kids who want to be, raising the flag for women's, rights, gender equality, LGBTQ rights, who want a seat at the table at these organizations, are knocking on the door and being told that unless they check their Zionism at the door, unless they renounce their support for Israel, they do not have a seat at the table. And we've seen that in marches, the LGBTQ marches, the recent march in Washington. I mean, it is absolutely appalling and very, very complicated for our kids to be able to publicly, proudly declare their support for the state of Israel. They have family connections. They have historical connections. They believe in the righteousness of this country, but also believe in social justice issues, and are being told that they can't join these spaces. And I'm going to give you if there's one thing I want you to remember from my presentation, it's Congressman Richie Torres. Now, I believe you're nodding, Rabbi. I'm sure that Dr. Abramson and Michael know Richie Torres. He is a unique public figure. He is a man. He's 33 years old. Was elected to Congress in 2020. He is a Black, Latino, self-described gay man who is a staunch progressive, but who is one of the most vocal supporters of Israel that you will ever encounter. He was taken by my counterparts at the JCRC in New York to Israel when he was still a city councilman, and he believes in this, in our story, in our cause. I mean, within his kishkas. I mean, this man is so sincere, so genuine. He is so eloquent. He makes our case better than anyone I have ever heard. And I will tell you this man will not appear on a college campus in this country. His chief of staff, because I tried to get him to the University of Florida, the Gators for Israel, led by an Hispanic student, wanted Richie Torres, a Latino man, to come and speak. His chief of staff told me, sending Richie to a college campus in this country in the year 2021 is like wearing a Giants t-shirt, to a Jets game. I mean, it's inconceivable that this man will be able to speak on a college campus as a progressive without being shouted down. And that this is happening in this country points to the appalling culture wars, the double standards, the delegitimization, the intense criticism of Israel, which is very, frankly, is very difficult to counter for many of our kids. And so, I know in the interest of time, because we are already over time, and I want to allow at least a couple of minutes for questions. What do we do? What do we do? Well, I'll tell you that what I do with the Right On for Israel program is I prepare our students 2 years before they go to college. These kids need the history. They need the understanding of our narrative. They need the confidence. They need the connections. They need the clarity to be able to stand up and make their case, whether it's left or right. We're not coming in and preaching that Israel right or wrong. I'm not coming in and waving the flag and that everything that Israel does, or the previous government or this government has done, is the righteous and right way to go. What I am saying is that you learn your history, you develop an opinion, you go to campus with the confidence to be able to stand up and make your case unabashedly, unavowedly, unapologetically. Make your case. So that's what we do in the college space. And we tell students when they get to college, the first person you call is your mother, and the next person you call is the leader of the Hispanic Association on campus, the Black, African American Association, the Women's Rights Association, the editor of the school paper. You sit down, you tell them your story. What is your relationship to Israel? Why does it matter to you? And you create that relationship so that when you have a situation like we faced this past May in Gaza, when Hamas is firing 4,000 rockets on Israel, and Israel, like any country, has the right, the responsibility to respond, that door is already opened. That you have already created that relationship. And frankly, that's what we do in the mainstream as well. Because in my humble view, I'm not an expert in how to combat anti-Semitism, but in my experience, the only way you do it is not making the arguments on social media. It's not having the best and brightest, Twitter feed and making your case on social media. It is one-on-one retail engagement. You're sitting down with other faith communities, with other civic leaders, with elected leaders, and you are showing these people, we're just like you. I mean, we are people. We're raising kids. We're going to work. We have our agenda, our concerns, our priorities. Like every other community, there are going to be intersections in that work. We will come together when we can. We will disagree respectfully when we can't. But that's how you create and nurture the fabric of a healthy society. So that's the best I can do, Rabbi. I don't have any other secrets to share with our audience, but I would like to give them a chance to take some questions. I know we've gone a little bit over time.
Thank you so much, Linda. This is very true. And just coming back to that last point, just to reiterate, is that all hate is bred in the vacuum of the faceless other. And it's very easy to vilify people when they are faceless. So as you were saying, the antidote to that is bringing a face to who we are and having as you said, one-to-one retail discussions with people. When we sit down with people that we work with, we see, we commute with, and we exchange issues. I'll give an example. Just recently, we have this coalition, a community coalition, which Michael referenced. Michael and I sit on it, a community coalition, and we're discussing, there's a new development that's going on in a nearby in the Lawrence train station. And for the first time, I understood that the Hispanics who live in that specific neighborhood, see it as Jewish rich developers taking over an area where they have stabilized rent control, which means it's pushing them away. And so I had not heard that perspective from beforehand as to how they see it as the Jewish encroachment upon their neighborhood. But I was also able to express and articulate the need of Orthodox Jews to be within a walking range of a synagogue. And therefore, whenever there are synagogues, there's a sort of prioritization of land that's nearby. And the financial struggles that Jews have to pay private school tuition at the same time, and this incessant need to be successful. So when we each hear each other's side, it's actually it's quite an opening experience, and that's really is where it all starts, is those real conversations. There's been a number of postal questions, and I think perhaps just for the sake of time, perhaps we'll say, let's try to say 2 minutes per answer. The first is really more historical perspective. So just going to, in Dr. Abramson, your direction is, could the Holocaust have happened without the vilification of Jews by the church for centuries? You point out there were numerous stages. Could it have arrived at without that original stage? That's a very tough question.
Yes, and a little bit outside of my field, because I work with history as opposed to alternative history, which is down the hall next to prophecy. But I would caution perhaps an analysis of this nature, that while it's true that the special relationship that Christianity enjoyed with Judaism would certainly perpetuate some of the noxious attitudes we discussed here, it's also true that the church also preserved the Jews, again, largely for their own theological purposes. But in the 4th century, St. Augustine of Hippo articulated a particular notion which was come to be known as the doctrine of witness, in which Jews are expected to be preserved until the end of day, so that they could confirm the reappearance of the founder of Christianity. So ironically, while the church certainly had issues that made Jewish life something more challenging, at the same time, the church actively preserved Jewish existence. Many exceptions to that general rule, of course, but to conclude this brief answer, it's only when, with the Enlightenment and 18th, 19th century in particular, the advance of secularism and atheism, that you have true genocide really possible. The Holocaust was largely a secular, intensely secular, anti-religious movement.
Wow. Thank you, Dr. Abramson. We're going to, this question is more of a contemporary one, and I think it really speaks to where a lot of us find ourselves. The question is that when one personally comes across a person in an everyday situation expounding on how awful Jews are, how does one respond? So Ricky, who's presenting this question, is asking that this happened to her a few weeks ago, and tried to remain polite and careful afterwards, but a Gentile couple who was there reprimanded her for speaking out because they were afraid the response would be violence. So does one respond? Does no one not respond? That's sort of that balance. So it's like the Richie Torres thing that Linda, you had mentioned, what do we do? Do we run from being attacked, or do we have to say, I think this is open to Michael, Linda, just your thoughts on that?
So I would quickly say, the easy answer is it depends. Is in those kind of questions. Linda had mentioned something clear, which I think is critical, is the answer to answer on social media. So the problem is, a lot of times, is the average person in our communities, as educated as they are not professionals in this and don't know the right answers, and can end up putting us deeper and deeper. So to give you an example, what happened like in Ocean County, we ended up, all the bloggers, so to speak, that were constantly trying to push back, we gathered into one room and said, stop. Let us now centralize communications with the institutions and provide you messaging that makes sense here. So the individual person on the street, it depends on the situation, but there constantly has to be, as a community, larger strategic abilities and larger strategic education to individuals as to not just do you or don't you, but what specifically can you do? And that's kind of one of the reasons we're here today.
So, Linda, do you want to add a weigh in on that?
I'm having a little trouble. There we go. Yeah, I got a little distracted here. I did, but I did want to refer to something that I saw in the chat, and it was somebody who asked me about CNN and how things seem to be different today since my Scud missile reporting days, I suppose, which, believe it or not, are 30 years ago. Everything is different. I mean, the media is a completely different animal today than it was 30 years ago and 50 years ago. We are light years away from what media, what good journalism that I was schooled in, I believe, is about. And this is the conversation about that. But the one comment that I wanted to make is that what has remained with me since those years with CNN and that 6-week period of the first Gulf War, when Israel was under attack and Scud missiles were flying from Western Iraq. And Israel's prime minister at the time, Yitzhak Shamir, agreed not to retaliate against Iraq for fear of breaking apart that US-led coalition, if you remember your history. It was, in my view, the only time that I can remember in the last 30 years that Israel enjoyed, a favorable reputation and reviews internationally. People were happy that Israel sat on its hands, that Israel didn't retaliate, that Israel agreed to what George Bush Sr. had asked of them. Israel, frankly, was being victimized. Israel was being hit by these missiles. If you recall the damage and destruction, thankfully, there were very, very few fatalities. But no country should be asked to sit and absorb missile attacks, whether from Iraq or from Gaza. And if unfortunately we're going to be criticized internationally for doing what any sane country on this planet would do, which is to retaliate against missile attacks, then so be it. I, for one, I'm prepared to take it on. I think all of us would agree that, faced with either good reviews in the international press for not responding or critical reviews because we've done what every citizen and what every Jew on this earth, believes should be done, which is to take out the source of these attacks, then, I'm prepared to live with that criticism.
Thank you. I think many of us agree to that. I think that we're already 1 hour and 15 minutes out, so I think it's an appropriate time to go on to wrap this up. But I do want to take a moment to really thank the panelists from their very different and unique standpoints of addressing this issue. And I think that the lesson for the rest of us here who are currently here and those who are going to be watching the recording afterwards is the importance of being aware and engaging. Being aware in terms of what's going on. If anybody watching this is not aware of all the examples in history that Dr. Abramson had talked about, in current affairs that Michael has been talking about, in the campus work and advocacy that Linda has been talking about, then there's a lot of research that we need to be doing and awareness that we need to be doing, because this doesn't just happen in a vacuum. It affects all of us and affects all of our children and our grandchildren as they will be entering the very complex world that we live in. So the most important thing is really taking a moment to get involved, reaching out to Linda, reaching out to Michael, reaching out to Dr. Abramson and ourselves in our own network, making those, as Linda said, those retail connections to make a difference in our small spheres. Going back to Ricky's question as well. I thank you very much, Linda. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Dr. Abramson. Thank you so much for taking your valuable time this Sunday morning. And hopefully when we come back to our anniversary of Kristallnacht, we'll have more positive reports, God willing, in the year to come, God willing.
Thank you, Rabbi. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.